Yeah, yeah. I was probably about in seventh grade when I started like going to like swap meets and flea markets and stuff like that. And that's when you could pick up. So that would have been like 91. You know, you could pick up Atari 2600 games for 25 cents a piece, right? And then you would find these games, like, oh yeah, Yar's Revenge, and you're like, dude, it's 1991. I'm still playing Yar's Revenge, and it's better than anything that I'm playing right now. Like, how cool is this? So trying to find those gems that really catapulted Atari to the stratospheres, those really pillar titles that we talk about. So my dad was an avid collector. So when you see American Pickers, right? My dad was doing that in the late 80s, and I would be with him, and he was getting all the Coke machines and the pinball machines and this sort of a thing, right? So I grew up in a household where my father was getting pieces of his history, of his growing up back, bringing them into the house. And so I kind of just grew up with that, and I was like, I like that, but that's his thing. I want to get something that is from my childhood. And there, I mean, the number one thing for me was being able to go to the arcade, being able to go get a slice of pizza and play a great arcade game. And so there was two things that I looked for when I went to the swap meet. One of them was vinyl records. It's so cliche now because it's like, everybody's like, oh, vinyl, you know. Um, but vinyl records and any kind of old tech. Most of it was Atari products because I had always remembered that Atari was, the father of video games, and that appealed to me. And so the stuff like that, and like I said, being able to find like really cool games that still played good and played well in 1990 when there was all these other choices to be made to play video games. It was pretty awesome to find these older games that still played as good today as they did, back then. So that's pretty much the origin. Yeah, so my neighbor, my cousins, everybody else had Atari, and we had Intellivision, which I had always coveted everyone else who had Atari, because I had this Intellivision. Now, I mean, if you look back at it, the system had a lot of bells and whistles. It was sort of like the newer tech. It did a lot of things better than Atari could do. However, it never had the titles that Atari had, like Asteroids, Missile Command, all of these big games, Pac-Man, that Atari had. So I would have friends come over to the house, and I'd be like, hey, you guys want to play video games? They're like, yeah, cool. Hey, it's got wood grain on it. It's got to be like an Atari, right? Do you have Asteroids? No, I have Astro Smash. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, do you have, do you have this? No, I have this. Do you have Combat? No, I have this tank game, Armor Battle. Oh, okay. And then some of the kids would be like, oh, I'd rather do a math problem right now than play this in television. You know, as simple as Combat is on Atari, it's more fun. Yeah, I mean, no matter how good the graphics are, it's still better. You know, growing up though in that time period, nobody ever talked about that as kids. It was never like, oh, there's a video game crash. Like, no, like we were oblivious. Now, there. I do remember distinctly. I remember. We would go out as a family to eat for dinner or something like that, right? And we would stop in the mall or something, and or on our way to the mall, or we'd eat at the mall or whatever. And I remember my dad going through like the toy stores or the electronic stores would have these bins of like giant bins of games thrown in it. Like they were just a mound of games. And he'd be rooting through, and then he'd pull up, like, hey, look, I got Burger Time for $2, right? And it's like, as a kid, you're like, not like, oh, well, that was cheap. How'd you get Burger Time for so cheap? It's just like, oh, hey, cool, Burger Time, great, let's play that. And we really did. We milked that in television from 1980 until 1985. So 5 years, I didn't really have the concept of, well, there must have been something wrong here. It was kind of like, hey, we're drinking Kool-Aid in the summer. Why don't we save our Kool-Aid points and get this Intellivision Kool-Aid game? But it wasn't like we were lamenting or going like, oh shucks, because the flip side of that was that the arcade wing of pretty much everything, Sega, Nintendo, Atari, they were going very, very strong. And we went out to those arcades or to the miniature golf course or to the bowling alley to play these new arcade games that were coming out, not thinking like, oh shucks, the home division is shut down. Oh well. And Mark, yeah, yeah, yeah. It was a lot of, for us. It was just a lot of getting these games in the bargain bin, and but then also it was a different time too. So we weren't spending hours and hours and hours playing these games. We played the games for an hour, and then we were outside. We were running around. We were getting into trouble, you know. And it was kind of like, look, you could only play lock and chase for so long until you go, okay, let's go get on our bikes and let's go do something. Let's get out of here. But how? I mean, you look at it and it's right there in front of you. These were New York music execs who were flown out to California to try to wrangle this, beast of a new thing, and they played it like they would have played trying to sell record players, you know, and we'll just go forever. No, look, you make a record player and then we sell all the records. Okay. Well, they didn't get the idea that the technology, as soon as it was out there, that it was outdated and something else was going to happen, But again, we're looking at it with a different lens now. So I was in independent film for about 16 years. And I had a lot of actor friends who were dying for me to make some sort of episodic show, and that's all well and good for them because all they have to do is show up and be in the show, and then I have to carry all of the weight, the budgets, the editing, paying for the editors, the special effects, the permits and stuff like that. So at that point in my career, I was kind of like, I don't want to do this anymore, and I don't want to do it for you, actor. I'd like to do something for me now. And everything that I watched on YouTube was video game related. I would have conversations like you and I are having right now with my friends about any kind of video game system. TurboGrafx 16, we'd talk about different video games we love playing. And I said, why don't I just talk about video games? But what am I going to talk about? I found at my parents' house a Tupperware container where I almost kind of put my Atari Jaguar back in almost like a coffin years and years and years ago. And it was kind of like, well, this system is dead. I'm going to put it in this coffin, and I forgot about it until I rediscovered the coffin and I opened it up and it was all there. And I was like, oh my God, I've got like 60 games for this Atari Jaguar. It was my junior, senior year of high school. I was all in 100%. I wanted to make Atari win again, to be the company that I grew up knowing that Atari was this great company, right? And I was like, dude, 64 bits, I'm there. So every game that came out, I worked my butt off. I was totally locked in. I wasn't gonna do Sega Saturn. I was burnt by the Saturn in high school because I put a lot of money into the original Genesis, and they just kind of abandoned the platform. And I said, you know what, I'm gonna do the Atari. But anyway, long story short, the games came out and they were okay, and in the shadows was looming this Sony PlayStation. And I bought almost every Jaguar game that came out. And I was so disappointed that it did not do well that I just kind of like folded it all up, wrapped it up, put it in this Tupperware container. And I think it probably sat around for, let's see, maybe 10 years, which brings me to the YouTube thing. So I said, what am I going to talk about? What is my voice going to be about on YouTube? So many people are talking about Nintendo, and I grew up with a Nintendo, but what am I going to add to the conversation? And I said, you know what? I'm going to do something with the Atari Jaguar, because there's really not a lot of, if you go on YouTube and you try to find any kind of information, real information. I'm not talking about information where people are bagging on it or making fun of it, but there's very, very little information on the Jaguar. And so I said, you know what? Every game that I have is an episode. I could do an episode on every single game. And that's basically how it kind of all came to be. It was like, how could I do a show that's easy to do? It looks good. It sounds good. I could walk in, I could start filming, and I could produce this show with all of the knowledge that I had from 16 years of being in film. So it's not taxing. Yeah, my brother had a 3DO, and we kind of shared that together. And I had I could remember the summer cutting so many lawns just to get the Atari Lynx. Model 1, Model 1. That's right. I had to do work, and I had to, get out there and sweat a little bit, and I had a jar on my desk, and I would go in and I just dunk whatever money I made. And, every now and then my parents would help me. I might raise 75% of the links or whatever it was. And hey, can you give me, 25 bucks or something, or 30 bucks to help me out? And of course they would do that. But for the most part, and I think that's why I've kept so much of my stuff. Now, when I talk about the links on my links show, that's my links. Those are my games. These are my Jaguar games. These are my 2600 games. These are the stuff that I bought and I've saved, and the show is not an emulation show. I'm not emulating this stuff. Yep. Yep. Same thing. Same thing. You know what? I think I might have covered it on one of the Jaguar shows. Might have been Aliens versus Predator, but it was like, look, here are the cheat notes that I found in some magazine that I wrote down and put in the instruction manual. And as you flip it out and you're like, oh my gosh, like my handwriting is still that bad. It's really what it was. It was like a time capsule, opening this thing up and going, oh, you know what? Let me get online and see if I can find some information on this. This has got to be worth something. And it was like, well, that's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, I think for the show, for myself, is that not only are we trying to, and I think about this a lot, is that what kind of information are we talking about on the show that maybe people don't know, or I'm bringing in guests that have never played a 7800 or never touched an Atari Jaguar controller, and I'm giving them an experience for the very first time. You're seeing that for the first time, and you're getting like a real read on the game, you know. And then you have the usual suspects like Kendra and Mason will get on, my kids will get on, and Nicole will come on, and that sort of thing. My brother's been on quite a few shows, and my brother's been there with me, playing these games, and Bobby Collins, Shane Cottrell, and stuff like that. Those guys, so it's kind of cool, and I never really, I don't know, I never thought that it would be what it is, but I certainly am having fun with it.